Some days in Guyana, you'll be willing to bet that the sun is closer, or that there may even be two suns. Then, at other times, there's heavy rainfall outside of the traditional rainy season. But have you ever stopped to wonder why? What is climate change?
I do not understand much about climate change. It has to be something to do about the weather pattern.
For me to understand what climate change is, I must know what climate is. And for me, climate would be the state of atmosphere around a long period of time, approximately 30 years period. So, with that said, climate change would be the change in that regular state of atmosphere to another, like a drastic difference that is, in temperature, a lot of rainfall or least set of rainfall, or a lot of sunlight, etc.
I don't know much about climate change.
I think climate change is a change of climate over time, sometimes caused by pollution, and is bad for the earth.
Climate change. Most people remember when the rainy seasons occurred between May and June and November and January. But these days, it seems as though any time of the year can be the rainy season, and that we are experiencing either heavier rains, or more heat, or longer dry spells. These long-term changes in the Earth's climate are what we refer to as climate change.
The planet's climate has been constantly changing over time. The global average temperature today is about 15 degrees Celsius, with the current period of warming occurring more rapidly than before. Scientists are concerned that natural changes have been influenced by human activities that have serious implications for Earth as we know it. Human activities such as burning fossil fuels like coal, oil and natural gases are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide, which is the main greenhouse gas responsible for global warming. Carbon-absorbing forests are also being cut down. Gases like carbon dioxide, released from industry and agriculture, known as emissions, is adding to the natural greenhouse effect.
Greenhouse effect. Carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide are just some of the gases that are known as greenhouse gases. These gases, once in the atmosphere, prevent heat from escaping the Earth's surface. This is known as the greenhouse effect. However, the increase in these gases is responsible for the rise in the temperatures across the Earth, which causes the global warming of the planet and climate change.
The consequences have been enormous over the years, and Guyana has not been spared. The changes could drive shortages in fresh water, bringing about major changes in food production conditions, and cause a rise in the number of casualties from floods, storms, heat waves, and droughts. In 2005, Guyana experienced its worst hazardous event. Within 1 month, the country experienced about 7 times more than the average rainfall, some 60 inches.
That was a terrible flood. It affected me so much. At least you could see there's still a little bit of black mark on my house. Water on the veranda, water went right into the sitting room because I'm living at a lower level. So we had to really leave home, spend some time out at relatives who living above water level, and until the water came away. But even then, the scrubbing and the cleaning and all of these things that the water left was a source of discomfort. So apart from flooding, the after cleaning and making sure that nobody has got diseases or contracted any kind of disease.
At that time, meteorologists noted that over the past 100 years, Guyana's average recorded rainfall for the month of January was 7 inches. This was surpassed in one night of torrential rains. Hundreds of thousands of people on Guyana's coasts were affected, many of whom had to be placed in shelters after their homes were destroyed. There were 11 recorded deaths caused by the waterborne disease, leptospirosis. Official figures show that the 2005 flood caused an estimated $465 million in damage, which is equivalent to hundreds of billions of Guyana dollars. This was not the end. Other floods followed this major disaster, although on a lesser scale and impact. Guyana is particularly vulnerable because its coastal plain lies 0.5 to 1 meter below sea level, and the drainage system, which originated in the 1600s under the Dutch colonial rule, is under severe stress due to age and climate pressures. "90% of Guyanese live on the coast, which includes the capital city Georgetown. It is in these very regions that most of the sectors from which Guyana generates economic activities are operating."
I'm a farmer in Little Bayaboo, Mahaica River. What I understand from climate change is that you're getting different weather pattern in different times of the year, in different seasons. Take, for instance, like we usually get rain 2 times in the year, which is the May-June rain and the December rain. That is what all of us know. Traditionally, we used to get rains in those 2 periods. And in the August, September, we usually get dry, and in the March, April, usually be dry. But with the climate change stuff going on now, what happens is that sometime in March, April, you have heavy rain. And in August, September also you have rain coming in, and sometime in the May-June season when you supposed to get, or when you expected the rain, you're not getting any rain. So it's very difficult for farmers to actually predict how to plant, seeing that we are planting in low-lying areas where the land is prone to flooding very easily. So it is a challenge for farmers in terms of the weather, both wet and dry, because as farmers, we know that farming depends heavily on weather.
Research has projected that climate change in Guyana may be reflected in temperatures increasing up to 4 degrees Celsius or a rise in sea levels up to 2 feet. Weather patterns will become more extreme. The intensity of floods will bring with it social and economic implications. Authorities are concerned that there will be greater influence of the tide further up the river due to salt water entering our freshwater systems in a process called saline intrusion, which can cause loss of crop yields. This occurs during extended dry spells.
In the extreme dry season, what happens is that the salt water from the ocean tends to come up into these areas and go further up, like 10-15 miles up. It depends on how long the dry season prolong for. And if you're doing farming, the salt water is no good for the crop, so it tends to destroy the crop. So what happens in the dry season, you cannot plant anything because the salt water gets into the system and then you can't use it.
In plant life, it really cuts down on the productive capacity of those plants. For example, we find a lot of times crops are going almost to the harvesting stage. And then because of climate change, you might have a sudden influx of intense rain. Farmers are not able to harvest their crops. So the productive potential goes down. Sometimes you're able to get a little crops out of it or no crop out of it. And so the effect on the crop life basically is mortality and a reduction in its productive capacity.
Climate change has affected me in the previous years very bad. The reason why I say very bad, because I had no knowledge about climate change. But after I went to a workshop in Georgetown, I was given the calendar. And from that, I actually work. For instance, I renovated my pen because it was much lower, and I know when to breed my stocks.
Generally, climate change impacts livestock in a number of ways. The most important ones are in relation to temperature. The other one is in relation to relative humidity and what we refer to as precipitation, which is rainfall. The areas which are impacted negatively would cover areas such as production, that is, the number of animals you will get as a result of climate change will be significantly reduced. And if that happens, then there can be food shortages and prices can escalate. Another area is growth in terms of how fast these animals can grow. So you can get small animals coming to the market, and it takes a longer time for farmers to bring their produce to the market, which means their cost of production will definitely go up. The other area is reproduction. Now, when the place is very hot or very humid, animals tend to preserve their life and they will not be involved in reproduction. So those are some of the areas, in addition to what will happen to disease resistance. As animals are stressed out, the whole immunity system is compromised and they're therefore more prone to attack from diseases and pests, which could lead to high mortality, which is death, or sick animals.
This may result in higher incidences of vector-borne diseases such as malaria and dengue fever, as well as waterborne diseases such as cholera and diarrhea. The effects are very different in other parts of Guyana. Take the Rupununi, for instance. While the area has had its share of flooding, it is largely affected by droughts, which is compounded by climate change during the El Niño periods.
Rupununi, I'm coming back to you, to my mountains and savannas, to my rolling hills, green valleys. Rupununi, you're my home, sweet home, a place where I love to roam.
Located in southwest of Guyana, in Region 9, the Rupununi has about 24,000 inhabitants, primarily indigenous peoples, whose livelihoods are largely sourced from farming. Temperature has potential impact on plant disease. Droughts followed by floods and pest outbreaks are said to be the most frequently occurring natural hazards in the region. During the latest bout of El Niño, wells and rivers, which are important sources of water, went dry.
Tuna, atong, anai wisung hati anda mungla mungla ne, banal tunu, maki huwatauna, songa butabai, kagade.
Her name is Elcina McDonald. She's saying that during this climate change and this rainy season, we have suffered a lot. We get in sickness because the water contaminated. And they get in fever, they get in fresh cold, plus they vomiting, they had this vomiting problems.
I think climate change has been happening in different ways, bringing all kind of weather patterns and so on, which we never experienced before as the indigenous peoples, right? We look at high grounds to do our farming. Rightly, that is what he said, right? We go farther into the forest, and we haven't had experiences on flooding and so on. But this climate change, we are still questioning as the indigenous peoples, right? How this climate change came about. Who have contributed to climate change? The pollution that is coming, and many things,
The implications were far-reaching. Wilting and increased pest infestation were the most widespread types of crop damage, particularly for cassava. which is the main staple food crop for residents. While the effects on crops were widespread, the impact on livestock were intense.
There have been incidences of cows dying from lack of water. Right? They go to drink water sometimes in a drying up lake and get stuck, right? And can't come out. You got to get a truck to pull out your cow once it's stuck in the swamp. But with the building of that water reservoir at the back of this village, that should take care of the water problem for the cows during the dry season. Well, at this time of the year, this is the rainy season. You really cannot get enough firewood. All the firewood is wet in order for you to parch your farine. Is a natural basic people's food. And yeah, so as I said, they're trying now to save their crop during this rainy season. Some people have about 8, 10, 15 cans of farine already parched and put up. So when the need arises, they will have some farine to fall back on.
Given these realities, Guyana has been working to put systems in place to ensure the country is better prepared to deal with the effects of not only flooding, but all other effects of climate change. In Guyana, there is a need to not just improve the hard structures to prevent flooding. A typical example is the concrete structure erected on the seawall to prevent a reoccurrence of the 2012-2013 overtopping, but also the natural systems of our mangroves.
So this is how mangroves can play an important part in adapting and mitigating the impacts of climate change. Mangroves are a unique and beautiful species. They grow along the coastline in that area where the ocean meets land, or they grow in riverine areas. And scientists have proven that mangroves are able to reduce storm surges or reduce wave velocities, so that in areas where you have standing mangrove forests, it has the potential to reduce the impact of flooding on the coastline. In addition to that, when we're talking within the context of climate change, mangroves have the potential to reduce carbon stocks about 5 times more than other tropical forests. So for Guyana, adopting a mangrove protection and restoration program goes hand in hand with other climate change adaptation programs that are being implemented.
Adaptation. We adapt when we build sea defenses to protect against the rise in sea level, raise our farm beds during floods, or when we plant crops that are more resistant to extreme weather. When we take actions like these, we are less affected by the impacts of climate change. This is what we call adaptation.
Key agencies, under the leadership of the Office of Climate Change, have been working to ensure that the country is in a better place to withstand the effects of this phenomenon.
The Office of Climate Change is the department under the Ministry of the Presidency that has the mandate to lead government policies, strategies, and actions to address the impacts of climate change, to lead initiatives regarding climate change adaptation, mitigation, and resilience building. We are the focal point to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and more recently the Paris Agreement. And so it is the mandate of the office to work across all sectors and at all levels, national, regional, to ensure that we incorporate climate actions in plans and policies, and ensure also that we fulfill our obligation under these international agreements.
Resilience. When we talk about resilience, we are talking about the ability to predict adapt to, and recover from the effects and impacts of extreme weather patterns and climate change. Some of us have become resilient to climate change by raising livestock pens, so that during the extended rainy seasons, which bring floods, there is little to no impact on the health and safety of livestock, and therefore little to no impacts on our economic welfare.
The Ministry of Agriculture has implemented a number of adaptation measures, including some focusing on climate-smart agriculture. This is basically a business model that increases agricultural output while maintaining or lowering amounts of inputs such as land, water, or fertilizer. Over the years, the Ministry of Agriculture has also been working with livestock farmers to ensure that pens are built off the ground. Farmers are encouraged to plant on raised beds to withstand the floods.
So we started to think, a way forward, how we can really get around the new weather pattern. And then we come up with ideas like this here now, that if you can see in the background, we have a little pen, maybe not the best of facilities, but we have some better facilities now that we would not have to be out in the rain. The milk will be much more cleaner now than before, because you can think about it, you will have to milk in rain. You never know when the rain will come. You have to stay within a certain time limit. Maybe you will in the process of milking, and then there comes the rain. So all the mess from the cow, most of it will have got into the container that you're milking in, and it will have contaminated the milk.
Additionally, the Ministry of Communities is working to set up a National Water Council to facilitate management of water resources across the country, particularly with the increase of floods and droughts countrywide.
The two biggest energy consumers in any kind of in any building is either for heating or for cooling. In this case, in this building would be air conditioning systems in the building, but it starts with the building construction. So in this building, when we started construction of it, we built it to be as energy efficient as possible. And it wasn't because of climate change, it's just that it made economic sense. So I mean, we consume about $1 million of electricity a month in this building with all our air conditioning and everything. The building's 24,000 square feet. Any other office building this size, you're looking at, they're consuming somewhere between $3 to $3.5 million a month in electricity. So we're actively saving ourselves $2 million a month in electricity. And that's why, that's the reason we did it, because it made economic sense.
Energy efficiency and energy conservation contribute mainly to mitigation and reduction of emissions.
Mitigation. Mitigation is any action that addresses the root cause of climate change, that is, the volume of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere. An example of mitigation is the act of conserving our forests, which help to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. While adaptation asks us to deal with the impacts of climate change, mitigation seeks to slow down or decrease these impacts.
As part of the climate change mainstreaming, all government agencies are required to integrate climate actions to address climate risk. The focus on recent effort has been in making Guyana a green economy.
In our context, what it does is it places emphasis on the country sustainably utilizing its natural resources to develop the country. As you are aware, Guyana is very rich with mineral resources, biodiversity. Our ecotourism package is also unique. But what we have not been able to do is to utilize all of our natural resources for the total development of the country. Instead, we have only been able to use a few sectors, and a few sectors really have been driving the development of this country. With the green agenda, we will be able to utilize every single sector for the sustainable development of the country.
As an indication to Guyana's effort in becoming a green state, the government has designated Bartica as Guyana's first green tongue.
Bartica is expected to lead Guyana with its green state strategy. And what we are about to implement here in Bartica is initiatives that will of course be a model for other tongues and other communities and villages within the country of Guyana.
UNDP, under the Japan-Caribbean Climate Change Partnership, JCCP, contribution towards renewable energy and energy efficiency is piloting solar-powered electrical system and streetlights in Bartica. This balance helps to ensure the country is both socially and economically stable while reducing environmental risks.
Guyana is certainly not immune from the effects of climate change, and the Guyanese are seeing an unprecedented frequency of unusual, extraordinary climatic events in the forms of droughts or floods. One other aspect which is very important is that Guyana is also significant in the mitigation efforts. The vast tropical forests of Guyana are the planet's lungs, and Guyana is number 2 in the world in terms of forest coverage after Suriname. Now, Guyana has taken some commendable steps to address climate change, starting with the signing of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, to the most recent signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. The current government is formulating the Green State Development Strategy that builds on the Low Carbon Development Strategy, but also incorporates the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. Through this Japan-Caribbean Climate Change Partnership, UNDP, supported by the government of Japan, is working with the government of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
While governments and agencies are working to keep the planet safe, there is a role for every citizen. Scientists say that humanity can limit the efforts of climate change if each person uses just 2,000 watts of power a year. So, turning off your lights when not in use is one of the simplest ways to conserve energy. Also, if you have not done so already, ensure that your bulbs are LEDs. These will not only help to save the environment, but will save you some money as well. As a result of the emissions from vehicles, the cleanest modes of transportation are walking or biking. They are also healthy habits to develop. Planting a tree may seem like a huge task, but doing so with your school, church, or youth group has also been identified as a way that the average person can attempt to mitigate the effects of climate change as trees take in carbon from the atmosphere. Each of us can do our part in making the environment friendly.
This film has been made possible with financing from the government and people of Japan under the Japan-Caribbean Climate Change Partnership through the United Nations Development Programme, working in close collaboration with the Office of Climate Change, Ministry of the Presidency.